Hi everybody, welcome to Bone2Pick. I am Michael Davis and we are coming to you today from New Haven, Connecticut and the campus of Yale University and the Yale School of Music. I am really excited about our featured artist for this month, one of my favorite people and one of my favorite musicians and trombone players that I've ever had the opportunity to work with and know in my entire career, the great Scott Hartman. Scott is the trombone teacher here at Yale, and he runs the trombone program as well as coaching chamber music. He has had an extremely prolific career as a chamber musician, soloist, and educator. He was a member of the Empire Brass Quintet from 1984 through 1993. He recorded 15 CDs with the quintet. He performs regularly with a variety of chamber ensembles, including Proteus 7, Millennium Brass, the brass band of Battle Creek, the Yale Brass Trio, Summit Brass, and an outstanding group, four of a kind, an amazing trombone quartet. He has soloed with the Boston Pops Orchestra, the El Paso Symphony, the New Japan Philharmonic, the Caracas Symphony, Korea Philharmonic, National Symphony of Taiwan, among others. He hails from the lovely town of Elmira, New York. He received his bachelor's and master's degrees in music from the Eastman School of Music. His teachers have included David Ritchie, John Marcellus, Douglas Dernan, Alan Ostrander. He has also held trombone teaching positions at Boston University, New England Conservatory, and Indiana University. And I just had one of my favorite memories of Scott is when I was a very green freshman at the Eastman School of Music back in 1979. One of the first trombone players I heard when I got there was none other than Scott Hartman, and it was one of the most motivating days of my life. I remember hearing he has the best pure legato I've ever heard of any trombone player. And I remember thinking, either I should just go to the airport and go home right now, or I'm just gonna have to work my tail off and see if I can even get close to this. And I've never gotten there. It's still trying to get up to that level of beautiful legato playing, but it was such a motivating factor and continued to be throughout my entire time at Eastman. So anyway, without any further ado, Scott, welcome to Bone2Pick, and thanks so much for being here today and for hosting us here at this beautiful campus.
Well, it's great. It's always good to see you. It's always puts a smile on my face. hearing stories that you make up at the spur of the moment.
Not at all. I speak the truth, my friend. But it's great to be here. Well, I had the good fortune of driving through your hometown yesterday and thought of you. So why don't we start with that and talk about, and also the good fortune of meeting your wonderful family when I was a student back at Eastman. But let's talk about your early years in Elmira and what made you get involved in music and maybe in particular the trombone.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Quite a typical story, I think, for people like us. Came from a musical family. My dad played banjo and guitar. He was born in 1915, so he grew up basically in the Depression and through the World War II era, which was obviously the big band era.
Sure.
And so he was a real fan of swing music. He was a great dancer, and so he loved playing beautiful ballads on the banjo, of all things. That's what he was, a tenor banjo, 4-string banjo. And so he played round and square dances, and basically made his living in that period doing this. And he met his wife, my mom, at my uncle's music store, my Uncle Don was a great banjo and guitar player as well, made his living in Elmira as a professional musician, which is sort of unheard of at this stage. Yeah, so musical family, about 4 siblings. My older sister started clarinet when she was in 4th grade in the band, and I can remember thinking, just like 20 minutes a day. I don't see how I could possibly find 20 minutes out of my day to practice an instrument. But when it came time to join the band, then my dad chose trombone for me. I said anything that doesn't have a reed on it, basically, it's fine with me.
Always a good choice.
That's that joke about the definition of a gentleman comes to mind, right? But I obviously started on trombone, enjoyed it, came quite easily, and the school district was a good school district. This was in the middle 60s, I guess, when I started there, late 60s. And and which is a great time in America for public schools,
Yeah,
because
for
there are a
sure.
lot of people, benefiting from the GI Bill. They basically funded a lot of musicians to go back to school, become teachers. A lot of musicians came from Europe, so just music was booming in the latter part of the 20th century. So I benefited from a great school district. Had a trombone teacher, Doug Dernan, who was a middle school teacher, but a really fine trombone player, and a good teacher, avid teacher. And so I think one thing that I can say is I never had a teacher that steered me wrong, and
Wow.
which is a really lucky
Wow.
situation.
That's great. Well, and of course you went to college just up the road a little bit in Rochester, New York. Maybe you could share some of your thoughts as you look back on that time. I know we obviously intersected there for many of those years, but you were there for a good amount of time doing both your bachelor's and master's. And what are your memories of your time at Eastman?
Well, I had a great time. It was there was nothing negative at all for me, at that point, because I came from a medium small town, and really didn't travel too much before I got to college, and so Rochester was the big city for me, and I progressed sort of at a comfortable state for myself. I didn't want to conquer the world immediately. Just like one little step at a time was okay with me. So Rochester was a really nice sized community, and the school I found to be really, I learned a lot, met a lot of great performers, people like you, John Fedshock, Steve Witzer, just like Mark Lesker. A lot of these people were at school at that time. Vince DiMartino, I still play with Vince, and just like
Best, yeah.
great inspirations.
Oh, yeah.
Like Vince, for example, he never said a bad thing about any student he ever heard there. He was maybe close to 30 doing his master at that point, but I remember that he could find something good to say about everybody, which is a new idea for me. Which is I really learned a lot from that. So I had a great time at Eastman. Met a lot of great people that I still am friends with. Just picking up on what you said, like when I went to Eastman, I sort of grew up listening to Tommy Dorsey on recordings, Irby Green, Bill Watrous. These people were my idols.
Sure.
This is in the middle 70s. There just weren't that many recordings. This was pre-recordings by Joe Alessi and Christian Lindbergh, and these people that changed the face of in the trombone world, the classical trombone world, through their solo playing and recordings. I didn't have that, so I heard the jazz players, which are amazing players, of course, from that period. And so that's what I was hoping to be when I went to Eastman. I wanted to be another Jack Teagarden. But within the first week, I heard people like you. You're younger than I am, but people, trombone players playing some jazz, and it just it was so beyond what I had ever imagined I could do, at that stage of my life, and I basically realized at that point that I'm not going to make it in this business unless I do something else, so I can play legatos. Maybe I'll see how much money can I make playing legato.
I'm not sure I would agree that you couldn't make it in that end of the business, but you certainly found the niche of your playing that's second to none. That's for sure. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think about our time in the trombone choir at Eastman, and just hearing all these great players, Mark Lusk and John Fedshock and Chris Brayman and Kim Scharnberg and Steve Witzer, of course, and so many, Phil Tolga, the names keep coming. I know I'm leaving some great people out, but I had one favorite. I think it was Chris Brayman. I could be wrong, but I remember you played some beautiful legato lyrical thing, and Chris was supposed to come in next or something, and I could be getting this story wrong. It's been a lot of years, but he just kind of looked at you, didn't come in, and just was like, F you, because it was so good. It was so beautiful. It was like, I'm not continuing here. Anyway, I agree. It's a special place because of that reason. So many outstanding folks. Well, let's move forward a little bit in terms of you've had such an illustrious professional career, but I think the first thing and one of the things that I still associate with you so much is your time with the Empire Brass Quintet, and you were certainly with them in some of their most productive years and so many great recordings. I was wondering if you could just share your thoughts about being in the quintet and some of your favorite memories, and also I think this is really helpful for our viewers. If I may ask you to tell that the audition story about kind of getting off to a little bit of a rocky start when you were trying to get through the first piece or whatever it was that you were auditioning. You told me I thought it was a great story, and it speaks so well to when you have such great musicianship like yourself, you can overcome a little hiccup or something. But anyway, enough. Tell us about Empire.
Okay. I'd forgotten. I think I'd repressed that story.
Sorry to put you on the spot a little bit, but
yeah, it was sort of like a breaking of the ice sort of story. It was like you can only go up from here. So how about just like for the set the stage, for the Empire Brass. Okay, so back in those days, this is like I got this job in 1984, and there was just like this little golden period, I think, from 1980 through the middle 90s, where the world, the concert and the chamber music world was open to and ready for chamber music made by brass players, classical, as opposed to more pop, appealing to that broader audience. So the Canadian brass, they had sort of burst out onto the stage, and the Empire Brass, the American Brass, the New York Brass Quintet, those four in particular were sort of leading the way and creating a new market that hadn't been there. The American Brass and the New York Brass Quintet basically created that market in the 60s and the 70s, and then the Canadian Brass, they obviously have this flair for understanding and appealing to a broader audience.
Yeah, sure.
And so they were really coming forth in the late 70s. The Empire Brass at that point was made up of Sam Palafian, Rolf Smedvig, David Ohanian. The trombone chair rotated a little bit. Charlie Lewis played trumpet. So the trombones, Norman Bolter, Ron Barron, Don Sanders, Mark Lawrence, really fine players. But that was a virtuoso quintet.
Right.
And so I sort of got in at that point where they had just tried to break away from their other lifelines, basically, musicians, and trying to make it in this chamber music world, which seems to be one of the few times in the last 100 years you could actually do that with that ensemble. So my audition. Okay, yeah.
and just for clarity, then, so at that point, those guys were all doing other work and doing the quintet kind of on the side, or they had already dedicated fully to the quintet?
Well, I think I may be wrong, but I think I'm correct in saying that the Canadian Brass had committed to becoming 100% full-time brass quintet players, devoting themselves to the Canadian Brass sometime in the late 70s, I think. And then the Empire Brass made that jump, I think, 1980.
Okay.
In which case Rolf Smedvig, Dave Ohanian left the Boston Symphony to do this. Sam Palafian had been working a lot in Boston and New York, doing a lot of things, so he sort of dedicated himself to the quintet. Charlie Lewis, same thing.
Okay.
So they did that about 1980 or so. And Norman Bolter, who had been playing up to that point, made a number of recordings with the group, decided to stay in the Boston Symphony.
Right.
And so at that point, Mark Lawrence took a year off from the San Francisco Symphony in order to join the group and tour. So then it was the fourth year, I think, of the group's existence as a 100% dedicated to brass quintet group.
You're trying.
Yeah.
So sorry to interrupt. We're getting close to the audition story. My timing was awful there.
Okay. So that's all right. I think I was the 9th trombone player to play the group, if you know, depending on how you do your tabulations. But,
Right.
But people had sort of come and gone for their own reasons. But there had only been auditions for trombone. I think everybody else had been in that group since 1971 or so when I got there. So they've been there 13 years, and so they were looking for another trombone player. And now, since they had become a professional full-time group, they had to be serious about it and sort of cover the bases, make sure they got somebody that was, you know, it was worth their trouble to advertise, basically.
Sure.
So anyway, I through one of our connections at Eastman, Don Robinson.
Okay.
Don sort of met the group at Tanglewood, where we had been in residence, and we had a brass quintet seminar there through Boston University for many years. And so Don met the group there, found out there was going to be an opening, and did me a favor by mentioning to Sam Palafian that, you know, he knows a young guy that might do the job. And so Sam says, what's his qualifications, other than the fact that he knows you? I mean,
that should be enough for what you're on.
That's right. And Don knows everybody. What came back to me anyways is that, you know, Scott can get along with anybody. You know, so that was one of my prime qualifications that was appealing.
Let that be a lesson to you young players.
Right,
that's a good quality to have.
Chamber music, it's you know, it's like being married to the rest of the group.
Right, sure.
You know, so you really have to be able to get along. So, and Empire Brass was notorious for sort of being sort of one of those places that you'd have to sort of, you know, fit in. Otherwise, you get out. So anyway. So part of the audition was playing. They sent me this bunch of music, you know, a week before, and you know, practice that much music and come and audition for us. It was a little bit too vague to cover the bases, but I just started leafing through it and playing through it. One of the things that we did in the audition was one of the Robert King transcriptions of what was it? Art of the Fugue. That's right. Contrapuntus number 1. And bing bum 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 bing bum bum bum. Okay.
Right.
And so that was 4 measures right there. This is key to the story. It's just like I was supposed to be able to count those 4 measures and come in. You know, I think it was like the 3rd entrance or 4th entrance, but you know, basically, if I just was smart and just listened to that 3 times and came in, I would be fine.
Right.
But I tried to count, and it was, you know, there was the half note was getting the beat, and I was just, we tried this like 4 times, and I just, you know, I was not coming in right, you know, and Ralph, you know, said, okay, you know, what's the matter? Don't they teach you how to count up there at Eastman? I got bad time, okay. So I mean, that was you know, an icebreaker. It's just like, okay, you know, okay, I'll just sort of live through the next 10 minutes, go about the rest of my life, and they'll never see me again. But luckily, you know, I came in right. You know, Dave Ohanian just like pointed at me and said, "Play now," and you know, he just like wind me up and start me playing. Then I can usually do the job. But so. It was good. There were a number of really good candidates auditioning at that point. From what I hear from Sam Palafian, Rolf wanted me to sort of win that audition, whereas 2 or 3 other people had other opinions about who they would have chosen. But Rolf, you know, it's hard to argue with Rolf. So
yeah.
So
right.
I have to thank Rolf for sort of weighing in on my behalf.
Well, I'm sure he heard, you know, as everybody does, here's the outstanding qualities in your playing. So whether you were able to come in right on the 4-bar entrance or not, it was he heard something that he wanted. Good stuff. Well, thanks for sharing that story. I think it's a great story, and I think it just goes to show you, you know, like how to stay calm under pressure when things aren't going right, because they're, you know, if you stay, especially somebody with your skill set, it's like it's going to happen and it's going to come around. So I think it's a good lesson for younger players to just kind of keep that in the back of your head when things aren't, you know, necessarily going your way. Let's talk a little bit about your time after Empire, and I don't quite have the exact chronology of it, but I believe you maybe went back to Boston, and then maybe talk a little bit about your teaching that you were doing at the time, and then the time you spent in IU. And I also wanted to include, this kind of makes the question a little bit on the wide side, but you kind of made a choice to stay in the chamber music world and not go orchestral playing, which clearly you could have chosen to go that route if you wanted, and maybe you could talk about if you thought about that at this period following Empire, or how that actually took place for you.
Yeah. Well, as you know, one always has to sort of be thinking of what am I going to be doing 6 months from now, a year from now? Am I going to keep doing this forever, or do I want to switch gears? Mm-hmm. And I got into the quintet. That was my first big job. A job that I could actually put some money in the bank at the end of the month and pay my rent. And I found that I really liked it. It was actually great playing with the group. Musically, it was fabulous. And in spite of, it's intense being in a group like that. The rehearsals, the recording, preparation, and the concerts. It could be pretty intense, but it was a pretty low stress group, in the sense that if people screwed up on a concert and miss a note, who cares? You've got plenty more notes you can play. Yeah. And so it was really fun to make music with that ensemble, and I enjoyed it. When I was entered that job, we also had a residency as a brass quintet at Boston University, which included some private teaching, some chamber music coaching. We ran the chamber music program for brass at Boston University, and then in the summertime, this 8-week Empire Brass seminar at the Boston University Tanglewood Institute. Mm-hmm. And so I not only got a job as a trombone player, but I was a college professor at this point. Mm-hmm. And luckily I had done my music ed degree as well as a performance degree at Eastman, and I did a fair amount of substitute teaching. Yeah, that was my preparation for becoming a college professor. teaching gym and kindergarten. I did it all.
I could see that being helpful.
Actually, it was. It was. It's basically crowd control. That's what teaching. Stay one step ahead of the people you're in charge of, and you're all set. That's what I came away with, and that was a lifesaver. Really, it was the best thing I ever did. Yeah. So when I left the Empire Brass, 9 years at the Empire Brass, and then I stayed on at Boston University as an adjunct teacher, which was sort of what I didn't really know what I was going to be doing after that point, and I basically decided I didn't want to pursue the orchestra route because I really enjoyed playing chamber music, solos, and teaching. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to pursue that lifestyle if I could. John Swallow had just retired from New England Conservatory at that same time that I left the Empire Brass, and it seems that the New England Conservatory sort of considered me in a similar sort of category as John Swallow. John Swallow played with the New York Brass Quintet for many years, played in New York, so just basically a lot of chamber musician experience. So that was sort of someone they were trying to, whose shoes they wanted to fill, and so they thought that maybe I could do that. Mm-hmm. So luckily I got that job adjunct also at NEC at that point. Mm. And so that gave me enough money that I could pursue my chamber music career. And so for the next 3 years I lived up in the mountains of New Hampshire and sort of traveled out of there, came down to Boston and taught, and gradually accumulated thousands and thousands of dollars of debt.
I thought you were going to go the other way with the thousands of dollars, but sorry to hear that.
That's right. Yeah. Paper with negatives or pluses. All adds up to it doesn't make too much difference. It's sitting over there on the desk. And, as long as nobody's knocking on your door, who cares? But they started knocking. I saw Ellen Dean on a gig actually that we did. It was fun. It was playing with the David Ohanian Ensemble, which was an all-Armenian brass quintet. Yes. playing at the 100th anniversary of an Armenian church in Fresno, California. And,
lovely.
I was Hartmanian for that night.
You do have an Armenian quality about you. I've been meaning to talk to you about that.
That's right. I love falafel as much as the next guy. So anyway, Alan says, Alan's not very Armenian either. But
No.
but he was teaching at Yale at that point, and John was about ready to retire from Yale. And so he asked me if I'd be interested in this job. Mm-hmm. And so, no, you know what? I've hopscotched ahead one job. That was how I got this job. Alan sort of brought it to my attention. Before that, it was Stephen Burns, mm-hmm. who's from Boston but was teaching at Indiana University. He's a trumpet player, soloist, conductor.
Right.
And he was teaching at IU, and I saw him as I was walking into BU one day, and he was walking out, and he said, "Hey, Keith Brown is retiring, at IU. Do you think you'd be interested in applying for that job?" Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's how I do my homework. I just prowl around and wait for somebody to offer me opportunities.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how you clearly made a decision though about we're not going to go orchestral, and you were enjoying being a chamber player, and part of that I'm sure is the ability to you got to be here today and you're over here tomorrow, and you got a lot of irons and a lot of fires, and trying to keep all those things going. Well, you talked about how you got the job here at Yale. It might be great to just jump into that right now. And for those of you who haven't seen the Yale website, I really thanks for sending over that link. Scott sent me a link of the trombone department and talks a little bit, a very short video, but really well done. And I really got a feeling for what it's like here for the students. And I learned about the program, and I also learned more about your approach to teaching. But maybe you can talk to us about the program here. I noticed there's only 6 students, so it's very selective and competitive, I'm sure, to get in. But once you're here, it's so much attention and focus. It sounds like a wonderful program, and you're obviously doing great work here. So tell us about how it's been here at Yale for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is a great institution. That's one thing that I realized through being with the Empire Brass. I after a while you start, people ask you what do you do? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I play with this group called the Empire Brass. Okay, so it's sort of an easy way to identify oneself, and sort of somebody can say, oh yeah, I see what you mean. So there's that, but so it's one thing to be associated with a good institution as opposed to it's if you're going to attach yourself to an institution, attach yourself to the best. Okay.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
That's one thing I learned in that ensemble, and Yale was obviously an institution that is a world. That's a name everybody knows.
Yeah, no question.
And I find that this school is lives up to its reputation as the administration is excellent. We've got money, which money runs everything. Mm-hmm. And it's a great faculty. The facilities are great, and so therefore, and our mandate is as a school of music is to be the best imaginable. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes people don't realize that the School of Music at Yale is graduate level only, so it's post-baccalaureate. Mm-hmm. And so for the most part, everybody that comes, most of the musicians that come here as students are here for generally 2 years at a time, for a 2 years master's program or a 2-year sort of parallel program, or maybe for their DMA, be here about maybe 3 years. But the model is that they basically have 150% of an orchestral sitting roster. So as opposed to 4 trombones, they'll have 6 trombones. So 2 bass trombones, 2 tenors, 4 tenors. Same for the other winds. And it doesn't have a jazz program necessarily. It's primarily, its focus is orchestral and chamber music, as well as music theory, composition. And so, like I say, it's a really high level, and we have been really fortunate enough to be able to attract the students that go on and become professionals. Mm-hmm. So we're basically competing with the other top institutions, Juilliard, Colburn, Indiana University, Northwestern.
And I think you may have touched on it, but I noticed it's, if you get into the program, it's all scholarship, and in fact they get a stipend. So
right.
Sounds like a phenomenal deal if you're able to get in.
Don't miss this opportunity.
You know, when I watched the video, a young lady who I should have wrote down her name, but she's a wonderful player. Sounded like I heard her playing a little bit, but she talked about how, and I thought this was a wonderful thing to bring up. You know, she talked about nerves and how she was getting nervous, and every musician gets nervous, and if you don't, then you're lying, because on some level I think we all get nervous. And even people like Miles Davis, who played, how many shows did he play? You know, thousands of performances, and he always said he always got butterflies. So it's okay to get nervous. But she talked about it, and I wanted to ask you specifically, because we're talking about you were kind enough to share the audition story with Empire, and I'm sure you were nervous for that, and then when things start messing up a little bit, we all the tendency is to get more nervous. And she said that you really helped her a lot, and it just made me think I wanted to ask you about that, how you think of that and how you approach dealing with nerves, especially if things are maybe not going so well. But I was curious how you look at that.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed that, you know, so people don't just walk around being nervous for the most part, right? You know, they've got a reason to be nervous, right? You know,
Right,
something that they're afraid is going to happen. And you know, for trombone players, it's, you know, we're talking about performance anxiety usually.
Right.
So I found I've just noticed myself that, you know, playing in a chamber music ensemble, and we play, you know, this is great. I can't remember what, you know, my life before that necessarily, you know, what I was really thinking. I don't think I ever got that nervous in a performance, but, you know, go out and play concerts, and we would play, say, 7 concerts a week on tour. And so the good thing is, you know, you'd practice and you'd get ready to play these concerts, and then you'd have to go out there and do it for the audience, and you could screw up, right? Okay, but so maybe you miss a note, maybe you miscount, you don't come in right. You know, 2 seconds later, you're playing and things are fine. Okay, so it just sort of occurred to me, and my colleagues, like I said a minute ago, they didn't care. You know, you screw up, you screw up. You know, don't play out of tune. You know, but if you miss a note, who cares? So that was really great. So I ended up realizing that if I missed this note tonight, and this happened, you know, so you know, we used to do this West Side Story thing, right? You know, high D, and I missed it like 47 times in a row. You know, night after night after night after night, and I'd get closer and closer, and I started to figure out, okay, this is what it feels like when it's going to, you know, work. And every once in a while it would work, and then finally I figured out, okay, now I can control this so that I can do it every night.
Right.
You know, so that was what a great luxury that is, to just like to have one shot at it, and to go over and over and know that you're going to be able to, you know, you don't get it tonight, you can try it tomorrow night.
Right.
You know, so I just ended up not caring anymore. You know, because I realized that, you know, the audience didn't care. You know, they don't care if I missed that note or not. You know, my friends don't care.
Yeah.
You know, so why should I care? you know, because you know, you don't want, you know, you want to do it, but you know, if you do it, fine. If you don't, then life goes on.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't change your life. So that's my mantra, is that it doesn't really make any difference, and I find it's true. You know,
Yeah.
I find that people in the audience are basically there because they want to hear what you're doing, and they like. You know, they don't have to stay. You know, they can go and have a nice meal after they hear you screw up. You know, they really don't care. You know, if you screw up, it makes them feel better because they can do better than that themselves, they think.
Right.
So I mean, it's basically, you can't lose. Either they love you or they empathize with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just so, like, that's the bottom line for me. It's just like, you know, you really don't have to care. You know, and you know, you can think of all the reasons why you shouldn't care. So I mean, you can do all these sort of relaxation and meditation things, and take Enderall, you know, which I've never taken that, so I don't know what that feels like. But I basically talked myself into the fact that it's not that important that I screw up or not. You know.
Well, that's great advice and a great way to look at it. And I know when it's a matter of taking the importance level off. I think, obviously you care about playing and wanting to play your best all the time, and I'm sure getting to work so much with Empire and a group that cares just about how the music is feeling and all of that, and whether and I say it all the time as well in clinics, it's like, we're brass players. We're going to crack notes, guaranteed.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to work tomorrow and I'm going to crack notes. I don't know which ones they are yet, but probably ones that I've cracked before.
Hopefully,
but
yeah.
You're absolutely right. Your ability to just forget about that and not be too obsessed about it is great.
Buddy Rich taught you that,
Great
right?
advice. Yes, he did. Yeah, among other things. Yeah. Well, let's talk about. I mentioned in the introduction that you're playing in so many different groups all the time, and from the Yale Trio to Four of a Kind, which is one of my favorite groups with Joe Laskey and Blair Bollinger and Mark Lawrence, who doesn't get any better than the four of you guys. Has it always been that? That was always the four members.
Yeah.
So that was the. Anyway. Can you share just a couple of thoughts, maybe of some of your favorite groups that you play with? Just kind of some memories that make you smile thinking of some of those ensembles.
Sure. Yeah. So just like a truth in advertising type thing. At this point, a lot of these groups we don't play that often these days. Just like the business, as you know, is really tough. Like I said, that there's that golden period, 85 to 95. So we basically do these. I'm still a member of these groups, and we get together, but we don't necessarily try to make a living.
Sure.
So lots of great stories. It's just music is self-indulgent when it comes down to it, right? You try to make a living, doing this, and it's good luck to you. Why should you do it? You don't do it to get rich. You just do it because you love to do it.
Yeah.
And it's fun to play for oneself, and it's fun to play with other people, and fun to play for an audience. It's just like it's just gives you good feelings. So that's why we do it.
Sure.
So that's why I play with these groups. They're people that I love to make music with. I love to hang out with, and people that are like me.
Mm-hmm.
Just like hanging out with people that like to live their life and do things that I like to do. So it's really fun to, it was a real treat to play with the Four of a Kind, for example, with Joe Laskey and Mark Lawrence and Blair Bollinger. And it's basically a hobby. Those guys make their living in an orchestra, and every time they leave for a week, they probably lose money.
Right.
Yeah. So we just do it for fun. I remember when Joe's got a reputation for sort of being an intense guy, right? One of our favorite lines from Joe was when we got together. The first week we ever played together was when we did our first recording. We just got together and said, okay, let's make a recording and we'll see what happens. So we spent a couple days sort of just sitting there playing and figuring out how to, what happens when Mark plays first, what happens when Joe plays first. And we had to figure out how to sort of lead, just invent an ensemble and sort of, and what's it like playing third trombone to Mark and things like this, right? So we did that for several days, and then they turned on the mics and we started putting things together, and Joe had to get back to New York for a concert, I think, one of these nights. We were recording at Curtis, and we came back after lunch, and Joe was in the hall by himself there, and he had this look on his face. We knew something was up. Joe's, either he's just gotten bad news or we're going to get some bad news.
And I think it's going to be the latter.
Yeah, that's what we figured too. But he's a consummate gentleman. Actually, he's a great guy, and so we all got our horns and warmed up, and Joe sort of stood there and he sort of looked at us and he said, "Gentlemen, you realize that I hold no malice towards any one of you," etc. So that was his icebreaker there. It's just thinking, okay, I just want you guys to feel good about this, but I'm going to say next. But so he was just uptight because things were not going as fast as we needed to record, and he had to catch a train. But that was just like, so we used that line a lot, gentlemen. Yeah, and that was great because this is Joe takes playing trombone seriously, as do all of us.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's a personal investment in what we do, and it's just like that's one of the nice things about that group, is just we had such a good time just hanging and laughing with each other,
Yeah.
and realizing that, this is not the end of the world.
Yeah.
That being said, I remember Joe saying that one time, that the fear of missing a note is what kept him practicing. It's like, it's just like, everybody gets nervous,
Yeah.
And that's Joe's thing.
Yeah.
I gave up on that a long time ago.
Everybody's got their own approach to how to deal with it, I suppose, and that's one. But that's a great story. I hold no malice to use. I'm gonna start using that myself. Well, let's shift over to you've done a lot of solo playing, and maybe you could talk a little bit about how that's different for you in terms of playing in an ensemble, and maybe a couple of favorite things. It must have been nice to solo with Boston Pops, and you've been all over the world. I mean, you've done quite a few things in Asia, but you could just touch on that a little bit.
Yeah. Just sort of a little background again. So when I decided I wasn't going to be a jazz player back at Eastman, and then sort of like after sort of coming out of my drunken stupor, facing the world again, I said, okay, I guess I'll be an orchestra player. That's how I can make a living. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to do that, so prepare for that. Going through college, I had no idea that you could make a living as a chamber musician. It's just like people were not doing it when we were in school.
Yeah.
But things had changed enough by the time I got out of school that got in the Empire Brass, and we did a lot of gigs with orchestra. So we'd be featured with orchestra, and in the course of a quintet concert or quintet concert with orchestra, there would be a trombone solo, right? So basically, I gradually became more and more comfortable playing solo, and it was something that even though when I was thinking of being an orchestral player as a professional, I decided that would be a great way to pay the mortgage, and then I could do whatever I wanted to do on the side. Because I realized I like to play chamber music and solo. Mm-hmm. And it's just, again, self-indulgent and fun. So.
You're so self-indulgent. So always just
I know,
keep
that's
coming
what
back to
everybody
that,
says
right?
about me. It's all about me. And
If there's anybody who's not self-indulgent, it's you, but go ahead.
It's just like doing what you want to do, right? Hopefully I'm not stepping on anybody's toes in the process. But, it's basically chamber music. You play a solo, you're playing chamber music with an orchestra, with an intermediary, who's conducting. Mm-hmm. And which sort of brings us, it's basically making music together, which, and, I have to say, I really am intrigued with this whole idea of making music together. My wife's a conductor, and just like this whole idea of this physicality of expressing music so that people can play together is intriguing, and having spent a career playing music without a conductor, you have to be really sensitive to sound and to the implication of where the music's going, and part of sort of physically being aware of what people are, sort of how they're moving, sort of helps you sort of know where the music's going. And so working with a conductor, working with an orchestra is just an extension of this. It's really sort of momentum, in terms of sound and time. And so and then what latitude do you have as a soloist expressively, within the context of what's going on? You don't, as a soloist, I basically have to play so the conductor knows where I am, and can anticipate where I want to go, so that they can tell the orchestra, show the orchestra, and I end up having to accompany, especially a large ensemble like this. In a rehearsal, you try to show them what you want to do, what tempos you want, how loud you want to play, et cetera, where you want to go, how intense you want to be. And then when you get to the performance, whereas you might have just sort of rammed it down their throat a little bit in rehearsal and just like not give an inch, it's just like you play this way, this is what I want. In a performance, you basically have to go with the flow. You don't want to derail the whole event just because, they're not playing your tempo. So you end up so that's one of the fun things about being a soloist, is that you still are not totally you don't do exactly what you want to do all the time. You have to be aware of the musicians playing with you, and sort of this interaction is always there. And that's what I really find fun about music.
That's great. I haven't heard it put like that. It's a really great way to say it. And you're right. I mean, that you're playing with the orchestra, but with the conductor, together you're creating. It's not just about on the soloists, take it or leave it. You know. I mean, that's a great way to say it. I just wanted to shift gears a little bit and mention two people who were very special to you, and one in particular to myself, who unfortunately we've lost recently, and just wanted to give you an opportunity to sort of have a thought about and share maybe a quick story about each one of them. One being who passed away this past year, Rolf Smedvig, who obviously was a very important person in your career. And then the other gentleman is our old late great Steve Witzer, who's a very dear friend of ours, and I still can't believe he's gone. But every time I think about him, puts a smile on my face, and his spirit and energy lives on like crazy for all of us. But just wanted you to have an opportunity to speak about those two incredible people.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah, it's sort of two really important people in my life. You know, Rolf, I spent a lot of years playing with Rolf, and he was one of the most important influences on my musical thought and abilities, and basically without him sort of advocating in my behalf to have the job that I started with, you know, who knows what I'd be doing now. So great guy, just like an absolute purely musical guy. You know, just like had absolute finesse. You know, one of the most graceful, finesseful trumpet players I've ever heard, and a great leader. Really great. This is one thing that I do a lot of chamber music coaching and brass coaching. Usually, there's a trumpet player involved. You know, they get in the melody a lot, right? So you know,
that's what they do.
That's what they do. That's right. And so you know, if it weren't for trumpet players, I would be flipping burgers someplace, right?
Me too. No question.
That's right. You know, it's just like, you know, somebody's got to play the melody and somebody's got to make them sound good, and that's my job. Make them sound as good as possible. Make their job as easy as possible, right? So that's one thing that Rolf liked about me. Is like I'm a supportive, you know, musician as a chamber player. Yeah. And so he's a great leader, and you know, I think every trumpet player out there, you know, don't apologize for laying it down. Yeah. You know, just like, you know, without that, you know, I don't know what to do. You know, so it's not my job to lead if you're playing melody. Yeah. So I mean, Rolf was so good at that. Wow. And you know, I had a great time, you know, playing tennis with him and skiing with him, and you know, he's a good hang. Yeah. So you know, here's to you, Rolf. Yeah. Wherever you are. Yeah. And Steve, you know, is like one of the most charismatic guys I've ever met. You know, just like trombone player, you know, inspiration. You know, he was the leader of the trombone pack, I think, at Eastman when we were there. You know, there were a lot of, I mean, in various ways. I mean, he was Mr. Classical. Yeah. So he wasn't, you know, there's Fedjock was there, Dave Slonaker, you were there, Kim Schonberg. So obviously, you know, Steve wasn't competing with you guys, and Phil Tugga, you know, Phil Tugga is like one of my heroes. Yeah, you know,
still, you know, pound for pound, maybe the best guy there, you know, as a trombone player.
But incredible. Anyway. Yeah. But Steve, you know, he's like, he had the attitude, and he was like the can do, and you know, I will do no matter what. You know, so like he'd practice 4 hours a day, and sort of his lip started growing. You know, he started to look like a platypus. You know, year after year, his lip would get longer and longer and more muscular. You know, he was just like really strong, but just like the greatest. You know, he just loved what he did. Yeah. You know, and you know, funny guy. You know, I just got all kinds of images of him. We took, Don Robinson and I and Steve, you know, took a trip through Europe, you know, after graduating from college. And
I remember when you guys did that trip.
Eastman Festival, and it was just like so much fun. We just like Steve is Norwegian descent, and so we went, as is Rolf. So we discovered some of Steve's relatives in Norway, you know, on this trip, and went to visit the place where Steve's grandmother and her 13 siblings, you know, grew up in this cabin up on the mountain. Yeah. This is like way back in the woods and in Norway, and they took us back to the homestead. You know, we went and stayed 3 or 4 days with them, and they, you know, just treated us like, you know, long lost relatives, of course. And they, for one thing, they had, it was strawberry season, and they had this big bowl of ripe strawberries heaped like this with freshly made whipped cream. And we just like, I had this, you know, 30 people, and we polished this thing off in like an hour. And it's just, oh, we were sick, you know, but we wanted more, of course. And so they came out with another one just as big. You know, it's just, wow. That and breaking into the family homestead, or what I remember. We, you know, hiked up the mountain to where this family grew up and lived, and it hadn't been used for a long time, and so we found a way through. We pried some boards open, and there was this reindeer coat up there with these wooden skis with the leather straps like you see on you know, Deadly Do Right. You know, so of course we dressed up and took pictures, and you know, Steve was right there with that.
Oh, you know, that's right up his alley.
Yeah, I mean, and that, just so much fun.
Yeah, I just wanted to share a couple of quick Steve stories, just because I love the guy so much. But for some reason, he nicknamed me T-Bone, which there was nobody more T-Bone than Steve, you know. But he would call me T for short. But I remember back when the dorms were over on University Avenue. This was our first year there. And as you said, Steve was so about orchestral playing. He was amazing. And I remember one Saturday we were practicing next to each other, and then I was like, Steve, I can't play. I'm going back, you know. And he's like, no, I'm going to do another hour or two, whatever. He goes, but you know what I want to do? I'm going to play out the window here, and I'm going to wait till you get across the loop and see if you can still hear me. Like, Steve.
That's right. Coordinate watches. You tell me, what can you hear
was,
at
10:15? How far was that? I mean, a quarter mile at least,
like
maybe half minute.
12-minute walk, I remember.
So I thought, yeah, whatever, sure, man, if you want. So sure enough, I get over there by the Loop Lounge, and he's playing Lohengrin, and I hear it, but it's all broken up. But it's like, ba, 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 ba. And then I could like, so I see him at dinner that night, and he's like, so could you hear it? I said, yeah, I heard it. And he's like, yeah. He's just like, so, like that was his
it was
that's what he wanted. Yeah. And then my last memory is, I think, with our excellent cameraman here today, Kent Smith, who's a great trumpet player in New York, as well as being a superb videographer. We were out on tour with the Rolling Stones, and we were playing Cleveland, and Steve was, of course, in the orchestra at the time. So we had a whole drunken fest at his house, and so, of course, I'd had a little bit too much to drink and decided that there's no reason why I can't play bolero as good as Steve Witzer, which is nothing could be farther from the truth, ever, but especially at that point. So I had, Kent was there, and we were just hanging out, and I played it, and I looked over at Kent, and Kent was like, yeah, it sounds pretty good. And then Steve picks up his horn and plays bolero, and I look over at Kent, and Kent's reaction was, that was significantly better.
That's why you're making $300,000 a year, and Steve's only making.
Yeah, unfortunately, it wasn't based on much of that at all. But anyway, as you just said, he had such a great spirit about him, and it still lives on. And his passion for playing was just, it never ended. You know, it's like he just loved it so much. So. Yeah. Here's to both Rolf and Steve, very important guys, and still giving us, we're laughing about it right now, so it's an incredible thing to influence people's lives. Well, speaking of passion, your new passion is making, an additional passion is making mouthpieces, and I understand you're about ready to launch the Hartman mouthpiece line. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about that and where that's headed. And
okay. You know, everybody has been on an equipment or a mouthpiece quest at some point, right? And so,
sure.
So I played, you know, a Bach 42 and a Bach 5G for many years. Most of the recordings that I ever made were on those two pieces of equipment. But at some point, I started to realize that I could buzz better, you know, without a mouthpiece than I could on the mouthpiece, and then certainly without the mouthpiece on the trombone. And so just made me start to think, you know, what's the deal here? And equipment's supposed to help. Mm-hmm. So I started sort of exploring, you know, is it possible that my equipment could be better? And so anyway, started with mouthpieces and talked to Doug Elliott some, and went up to see John and Phyllis Stork, mouthpiece makers, and just sort of experimented and tried to figure out if we could make my mouthpiece better for me. Mm. and sort of just basically awakened sort of a side of my interests that I pursued ever since. I went out and bought a lathe, which Sean Sork said, you will regret this, I promise you. And I regretted it a lot of times, as my wife's regretted it even more. So anyway, but luckily, for years, I was sort of beating my head against the wall trying to figure out how mouthpieces worked. And so now I actually sort of have started to feel like I understand a lot more, and enough that I can make mouthpieces for myself. I'm trying to get them for my students, and one of the things that, we don't need to talk about this too much, but one of the questions I had in my mind is there such thing as a good mouthpiece, or is it depend on the right trombone to fit it in? Mm-hmm. And so one of my answer to that question is yes, there is a good mouthpiece. And what does that do? It responds accurately. Mm-hmm. Whenever you go, if you do that into it, it should do the same thing. And if it doesn't, then you're having to contrive what you do in order to make that work, which basically narrows your possibilities, because you're sort of standing on one leg already just to make X happen.
Right.
So I figured out how to make them respond correctly, and then it became clear that a good responding mouthpiece wasn't the answer for everything either. It had to actually fit the trombone, and every trombone's slightly different. So, so I figured out how to sort of balance them and adjust them. And so that's my angle on it, and that's what finally I feel vindicated and satisfied. If I stopped right here, I at least felt like I didn't waste all those years, and I sort of solved the puzzle for my own self-indulgence.
Well, it's more than self-indulgent, because you were showing me the one of the prototypes, I guess, but all the various components, which seems to me you're taking it to another level than I've seen with mouthpiece making, which is quite interesting. I look forward to trying the small bore ones when you get to that point, because it looks like you've definitely done some thinking at a deeper level in terms of how the mouthpiece works, and so yeah, wish all the best of luck with that.
All right,
that's good
thanks.
stuff.
We'll see.
Well, let's talk a little bit as we kind of wind down here. We'll talk a little bit about what the future is holding for you. I mean, not only here at Yale, but your lovely family. Your wife Sarah is a great conductor, and she's doing her work, and I'm sure you guys are having plans. And then the three kids in addition to the music side, what's ahead for Scott Hartman in the next couple of decades?
As much self-indulgence as I can squeeze out of it. It's basically if you can do what you want to do, that's what I'm talking about. Self-indulgence. Indulgence. If I don't, if I can just sort of enjoy my life doing what I like to do, then how can I complain? Yeah. And at this point, I've got 3 young kids, and they're growing up, and I want to make a good life for them and sort of give them opportunities and spend time with them. So that's I've got to sort of leave time for that. My wife, as you mentioned, is a conductor, and she travels a lot, and so I want to spend time with her and sort of support her and be there when she's making music. So that's I love to travel. That's one reason I do what I do as well, because I really like going places, eating great food, and seeing what's out there. So family things are going to take a lot of my time. I'm really very happy with the school here. It gives I've got very motivated and talented, accomplished students that come to work here, and which is again very gratifying for me to work with people that talk to people about things that I love to talk about, and hopefully help them move forward in their desires. So basically, the status quo, in the sense that I'm going to continue to try to get better and enjoy exploring who I am. Yeah, awesome. Great stuff. And my final question is, if you had just one piece of advice to give to younger players, both in terms of maybe thinking about trying to get in here at Yale, and also maybe thinking about, well, I want to be the next Scott Hartman. What do I do to do that? Well, the way you phrase that makes me think of one of my dad's favorite sort of anecdotes from you know, I had great parents in terms of they were really supportive. They never made me feel guilty or like I should not be playing the trombone or doing what I wanted to do, basically. So I'm self-indulgent thanks to my mom and dad. They created this monster. So they would go with me on auditions and, you know, whatever they happened to be. And so we went to Eastman, and I auditioned for Eastman, came back, and my dad had gone up there, and we came back and went to this all-area all-state ensemble band concert, basically. And one of my old professors was there who'd gone to Eastman. And so my dad was talking to him, and he wanted to know how the audition went. And so my dad said, well, it seemed to go well. The guy said, the teacher, Don Knobb, said that, you know, we should have a spot here for you. You know, it's just like, you know, just you know, wait for your letter, and things will be, you know, I think you'll be pleased. And it was one of the first auditions of the year, though. Yeah, so this local teacher said to my dad, well, that sounds really encouraging, you know, but don't get your hopes up. There are a lot of Scott Hartmans out there. You know, which may be true, you know,
Well, I'm going to have to disagree with him on that one. There aren't a lot of Scott Hartmans out there. That's for darn sure.
Google the name. They don't have, most of them don't play trombone, even though Scott P. Hartman plays bass trombone.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, so the bottom line with that is, okay, so, you know, I'm unique, but there's a lot of trombone players, a lot of great trombone players, and that was his message, you know. Sure, so like, don't get your hopes up. But my message would be the opposite. It's like, you know, so everybody's unique. Everybody has got something to offer. You know, maybe you know, I'm not going to be another Steinmeier. You know, I just don't have those chops. I never will be another Mike Davis. But you know, if I play the Shires trombone, that's my closest chance.
Well, this is a great opportunity for Scott. I happen to have one in the car.
Do you? Yeah. Okay, we'll see what I sound like. But I would say, you know, let people. You know, I encourage people to explore who they are. You know, find the opportunities to get better. Associate with the most talented, smartest, encouraging people they can, and be an optimist. Don't let an opportunity go by without having a better opportunity.
Yeah. Well, that's well said, and that's great words to live by. So, Scott, thank you so much. It's been unbelievable. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and thank you for taking the time and for having us, and for all the great things you said. I mean, it was just loaded with great advice musically and life-wise. So thank you. It was awesome.
I'm flattered to be here. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Likewise, Scott. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and we will see you next time on Bone2Pick.